The cruelest thing an alpha can do is not rejecting his destined mate. It's realizing too late that he was the only person who ever truly chose him. Adrian Whitmore had heard every story about fated bonds since he was a child, and he had never believed a single one. To him, destiny was just a beautiful word people used when they were afraid to make their own choices. He had built his entire life around control. Control over his company, his reputation, his emotions, and most importantly, himself. At 29, Adrian was the youngest CEO of Whitmore Biotech, a name that carried enough weight to silence a room before he even entered it. People admired his discipline, his intelligence, and his ability to remain calm under pressure. What they did not see was the quiet emptiness behind the perfect image. The night of the annual compatibility ceremony, the ballroom of the Whitmore Foundation's headquarters shimmered beneath crystal lights and polished marble floors. Hundreds of guests gathered, hoping to witness rare bond matches between alphas and omegas. Adrian stood near the window overlooking Manhattan, holding a glass of sparkling water, completely uninterested in the celebration around him. "You really plan to ignore the entire purpose of tonight?" his friend Marcus asked, shaking his head. Adrian glanced over. "I plan to avoid letting a test decide my future." Marcus sighed. "You say that now." Adrian almost smiled. Almost. Then the room changed. It was not dramatic. No one shouted. No one moved. But somehow, Adrian felt it. A quiet shift in the air that made him turn around. Across the ballroom stood Elliot Hayes. Adrian had seen thousands of people in his life. Investors, executives, celebrities. None of them had ever made him forget what he was thinking. Elliot was different. He was standing beside a display of artwork from young local creators, explaining something with a gentle smile to an elderly guest. He looked completely out of place among the wealthy crowd, yet somehow he seemed like the only person who belonged there. Then their eyes met. For one impossible second, the entire room disappeared. Adrian's breath stopped. A familiar warmth moved through him, something instinctive and undeniable. The compatibility system on the stage flashed. The result appeared for everyone to see. Fated match confirmed. The room erupted with whispers. Adrian Whitmore, the alpha who rejected every traditional expectation, had found his omega. Elliot looked just as shocked. His expression held surprise, hope, and a small amount of fear. Adrian hated that he noticed all of it. He hated that some part of him already understood. This person mattered. But fear arrived faster than acceptance. He remembered every warning about bonds. Every story about alphas losing themselves. Every person who had surrendered their dreams because they believed destiny had already written their ending. Adrian stepped forward, his face unreadable. Elliot waited quietly. "I'm sorry," Adrian said. The words felt colder than he expected. "But I can't accept this." The hope in Elliot's eyes faded slowly, like a light being turned down. "Because you don't believe in fate?" Elliot asked softly. Adrian looked away. "Because I believe people should choose who they become." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Elliot nodded. There was no anger, no argument, only a quiet sadness that somehow hurt Adrian more than he expected. "I understand," Elliot whispered. "But I hope someday you realize that being chosen by someone isn't the same as losing yourself." Adrian watched as Elliot walked away through the crowd. He told himself he had made the right decision. He told himself freedom was worth more than destiny. But as the ballroom returned to normal, Adrian could still feel the absence of something he had never even allowed himself to have. After that night, Adrian Whitmore told himself that nothing had changed. The world continued moving exactly as it always had. The company meetings still began at 8 in the morning. The city lights still filled his office windows every evening. His schedule remained packed with numbers, contracts, and decisions that affected thousands of people. Yet somehow, every quiet moment felt different. He had rejected Elliot Hayes in front of an entire room, and he expected relief to follow. Instead, there was only silence. A strange, unfamiliar silence where Elliot's presence used to be. For the first few weeks, Adrian convinced himself it was simply curiosity. He wondered how Elliot was doing because anyone would wonder after such an unusual event. That was what he told himself. It was not regret. It was not longing. It was not the feeling that something important had slipped through his fingers. But then small things began reminding him of Elliot. A painting displayed in a coffee shop window. A handwritten note left beside a meeting room. a soft laugh from someone passing by in the street. None of those things should have mattered, yet each one stopped him for a second longer than he wanted to admit. Marcus noticed. He always noticed. "You know," Marcus said one afternoon while placing a folder on Adrian's desk, "for someone who does not believe in bonds, you spend a lot of time thinking about the person you rejected." Adrian did not look up from his computer. "I am thinking about a situation, not a person." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That sounds exactly like something someone says when they are thinking about a person." Adrian closed the folder slowly. He wanted to argue. He wanted to explain that this was not about Elliot. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. Elliot had not chased him. He had not tried to change his mind. He had simply accepted Adrian's decision and walked away with dignity. Somehow, that hurt more than anger would have. Adrian had expected disappointment. He had expected an argument. He had expected Elliot to prove him right by showing that emotions were unpredictable. Instead, Elliot had shown strength. Weeks turned into months. Adrian returned to the location where the ceremony had taken place several times, always with a different excuse. A business meeting nearby, a charity event, a simple walk. He never admitted the real reason. He was hoping to see Elliot again, but Elliot was gone. Completely. No messages. No attempts to reconnect. No signs that he wanted anything from Adrian. And for the first time in years, Adrian experienced something he could not solve with intelligence or strategy. He missed someone. Not an idea. Not a destiny. A person. He missed the way Elliot listened before speaking. He missed the calm confidence behind his gentle smile. He missed the feeling that someone saw Adrian Whitmore, not the powerful alpha everyone expected him to be. One evening, Adrian stood alone in his apartment, looking at the city below. The room was perfectly organized, exactly the way he liked it. But somehow it felt colder than before. His phone rested on the table beside him. His fingers hovered over the search bar where Elliot's name was waiting. For several minutes, Adrian did nothing. Then he finally searched. The results were almost empty. Elliot Hayes had disappeared from the world Adrian knew. And that was when Adrian understood the one thing he never expected. Rejecting destiny had been easy. Living without it was the part he had never prepared for. The rain had stopped by the time Adrian Whitmore stepped out of his office building, but the streets of Manhattan still carried the quiet shine of a city waking from a storm. He stood beneath the lights for a moment longer than necessary, watching people hurry past with umbrellas and coffee cups in their hands. Everyone around him seemed to know where they were going. Everyone except him. For the first time in his carefully planned life, Adrian felt like he was waiting for something he could not name. Months had passed since the compatibility ceremony, yet Elliot Hayes remained the one question Adrian could never answer. He had searched for him without admitting it. He had checked public records, followed old connections, and looked through every possible lead. Nothing. Elliot had truly walked away. Adrian returned to his apartment that evening and found the same silence waiting for him. The space was expensive, modern, and perfectly arranged, but it no longer felt like a place to rest. It felt like a reminder of everything he had chosen over happiness. He poured himself a glass of water and noticed something on the shelf across the room. A small piece of artwork from the foundation event. It was not valuable. It was not rare. But Elliot had created it. Adrian remembered the way Elliot had explained the meaning behind the painting. He had said that some people spent their entire lives trying to prove they were strong, while forgetting that allowing someone to care about them could be its own kind of strength. At the time, Adrian had thought those words were simply a reflection of Elliot's personality. Now they felt like they had been written directly for him. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the office and immediately noticed the change. "You look like you did not sleep," Marcus said. Adrian continued reading a report. "I slept." Marcus looked at him carefully. "You stared at the same page for 10 minutes. Adrian stopped. He hated that Marcus was right. "I made a decision," Adrian finally said. "I am going to find him." Marcus did not joke this time. He simply nodded. "Good." Adrian looked surprised. "That is all you have to say?" Marcus smiled slightly. "I have been waiting for you to admit you cared." Finding Elliot was not easy. The artist community was large, and Elliot had intentionally stepped away from the circles connected to Adrian's world. But eventually, one small detail appeared. A local community art center in Brooklyn had recently featured an illustrator named Elliot Hayes. Adrian stared at the address on the screen. Brooklyn. Only a few miles away, yet it felt like a completely different world. The next afternoon, Adrian arrived outside the art center. He expected to feel confident. He expected the same control he carried into every negotiation. Instead, his hands felt strangely still at his sides, and his thoughts were unusually quiet. Through the glass doors, he saw Elliot. 3 years could change many things, but not everything. Elliot was helping children paint colorful pictures at a long table, smiling as he encouraged them. He looked peaceful, happy, different from the person Adrian remembered leaving that ballroom. Then Elliot turned around. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Adrian prepared himself for anger. He prepared himself for disappointment. But Elliot only looked surprised. Adrian, he whispered. Hearing his name from Elliot again felt different. Softer, more painful. Adrian stepped inside, realizing that for the first time in his life, he had no perfect plan, no prepared words, and no way to hide behind his title. He only had the truth. He had finally found the person he had been trying to forget. Adrian Whitmore had imagined this moment countless times during the months he searched for Elliot Hayes. In every version, he had something perfect to say. He would explain himself clearly. He would show confidence. He would prove that he had changed. But standing inside the small Brooklyn Art Center, surrounded by colorful drawings and the sound of children laughing, Adrian realized that none of those imagined speeches mattered. Elliot was standing right in front of him, and for the first time, Adrian had no control over the outcome. Adrian, Elliot said again, his voice quiet but careful. Adrian nodded. Hello, Elliot. The simple greeting felt strangely difficult. Elliot looked different from the person he remembered at the ceremony. Not because of his appearance, but because of the calm confidence he carried. 3 years ago, Elliot had looked like someone waiting for an answer. Now he looked like someone who had already found his own. I did not know you were here, Adrian said. Elliot gave a small smile. There are many things you do not know about me anymore. The words were gentle, but they carried a truth Adrian could not ignore. He looked around the art center. The walls were covered with bright paintings and handmade decorations. It was nothing like the world Adrian lived in. There were no boardrooms, no investors, no pressure to always appear untouchable. It was simply warm, human. This place suits you, Adrian said. Elliot glanced toward the children working on their paintings. It is peaceful here. Adrian almost said that he understood, but he did not. He had spent years building a life where peace was replaced by achievement. He had forgotten what it felt like to do something simply because it mattered. Why did you leave without saying anything? Adrian finally asked. Elliot looked down for a moment. The question had clearly been waiting for a long time. Because you made your choice. Adrian felt the weight of those words. I thought you were angry. Elliot shook his head. I was hurt. There is a difference. The honesty caught Adrian off guard. Elliot was not trying to punish him. He was not trying to make him feel guilty. He was simply telling the truth. I spent a long time thinking about that night, Adrian admitted. About what I said. Elliot looked at him. And what did you decide? Adrian opened his mouth, but the answer was harder than he expected. He could not say he suddenly believed everything about destiny. He could not pretend the fear had disappeared overnight. I decided I was wrong about one thing, Adrian said. I thought accepting someone meant losing myself. But I think I was actually afraid of letting someone see me. For a moment, Elliot said nothing. The room around them continued moving, but Adrian felt as if time had slowed. Then Elliot quietly said, That is the first honest thing you have ever told me. Adrian accepted the words because he knew they were true. Before he could respond, a small voice called from across the room. Elliot, can you help me with the blue paint? Elliot turned with a smile. Of course. Adrian watched him walk away and noticed something unexpected. He did not feel jealousy or frustration. He felt admiration. Elliot had created a life without him. A good life. A meaningful life. And Adrian understood that finding Elliot again did not mean claiming a place in it. It meant earning one. Adrian Whitmore did not return to his office immediately after leaving the art center. For the first time in years, he ignored his schedule. He ignored the messages waiting on his phone. He simply walked through the streets of Brooklyn, allowing himself to think about everything he had spent so long avoiding. Elliot Hayes had changed. Not because he became someone different, but because he had become someone complete without Adrian. That realization stayed with him long after he returned home. In the past, Adrian believed being needed was the same as being valued. He believed power, success, and control were the things that made people stay. But Elliot had walked away from all of that. Elliot had chosen peace over status. A quiet life over a golden cage. And somehow, that made Adrian respect him more than ever. The next few weeks were different. Adrian began visiting the art center regularly, but he never arrived with expectations. He did not come as a powerful alpha CEO. He came as Adrian. At first, Elliot remained cautious. Their conversations were polite but distant. They talked about simple things. The children's artwork, the weather, the new projects at the center. Nothing serious. Nothing that forced Elliot to reopen old wounds. Adrian learned quickly that rebuilding trust was not something he could demand. It was something he had to earn. One afternoon, Adrian helped organize supplies for the art classes. It was a small task, something he would have considered meaningless before. He had spent years making decisions involving millions of dollars. Yet carrying boxes of paint and arranging tables felt strangely important. Elliot watched him quietly. "I never imagined you doing something like this," Elliot said. Adrian looked up. "Neither did I." A small smile appeared on Elliot's face. It was brief, but Adrian noticed. He noticed every little thing now. The way Elliot smiled when he was genuinely happy. The way he became focused when creating something. The way people naturally trusted him because he made them feel seen. These were things Adrian had ignored before because he was too focused on what he thought he would lose. One evening, after the art center closed, Adrian and Elliot sat outside on a bench near the entrance. The city was quieter than usual. The warm glow from the streetlights reflected on the sidewalk. "Why are you really here?" Elliot finally asked. Adrian knew this question would come eventually. He looked down at his hands before answering. "Because I owe you an apology." Elliot remained silent. "Not just for rejecting the bond," Adrian continued. "For making you feel like you were only important because of it." Elliot's expression softened slightly. "You did hurt me, Adrian." Adrian nodded. "I know. And I cannot pretend that one apology fixes everything. I know that too." Elliot studied him carefully, almost as if he was searching for the person behind the reputation. "You really are different." Adrian gave a quiet laugh. "I wish I had been different sooner." The honesty between them felt unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable. It was fragile. It was something that needed patience. Then Elliot's phone rang, breaking the moment. He looked at the screen and answered quickly. Adrian noticed the change in his expression. It was not fear. It was not sadness. It was surprise. Elliot listened quietly for a few seconds before looking back at Adrian. "There is something you need to know." Adrian felt his heartbeat change. After months of searching, after finally finding Elliot again, he realized there were still parts of Elliot's life he had never seen. And whatever came next would change everything between them. The silence after Elliot's words felt heavier than any argument Adrian Whitmore had ever faced. There was something in Elliot's expression that told him this was not a simple conversation. It was a moment that had been waiting for 3 years. Adrian looked at him carefully. "What do I need to know?" Elliot took a slow breath, then glanced toward the art room where the children were finishing their projects. For a few seconds, he seemed to be deciding whether opening this door was worth the pain it might bring back. Finally, he reached for his phone and showed Adrian a picture. Adrian expected many things. He expected a difficult memory. He expected news about Elliot's career or his life after leaving Manhattan. He was not prepared for what he saw. A small child smiled back from the screen, holding a colorful painting covered in bright blue and yellow shapes. Adrian looked at Elliot, confused. "Who is this?" Elliot's voice was quiet. "His name is Noah." Adrian felt something shift inside him. There was no reason he should recognize anything. But the child's eyes, the familiar expression, the calm way he looked at the camera, all created a feeling Adrian could not explain. "Adrian," Elliot said softly, "Noah is your son." For a moment, the entire world seemed to become silent. The sounds of the art center disappeared. The movement around them blurred. Adrian simply stared at the picture, trying to understand the words. His son, a child he had never met. A life he had never known existed. "Why did you never tell me?" The question left him quietly, not with anger, but with disbelief. Elliot looked away. "Because the last thing I remember from you was that you did not want me." Adrian immediately shook his head. "That was not what I meant." Elliot's eyes returned to his. "But that was what I heard." The truth of those words hurt because Adrian knew there was no argument against them. 3 years ago, he had been so focused on protecting his own idea of freedom that he never considered how deeply his rejection would affect Elliot. He had thought saying no to a bond was only about himself. He never imagined that his decision would create a life where Elliot carried everything alone. I wanted to tell you, Elliot continued, many times. But every time I remembered that night, I remembered you choosing a life without me. Adrian looked down. For the first time in years, he had no defense. No explanation that could make the past disappear. Can I meet him? Adrian asked after a long silence. Elliot studied him carefully. I do not know if that is a good idea. Adrian nodded slowly. I understand. And that surprised Elliot more than anything. The old Adrian would have demanded answers. He would have used his position, his confidence, and his influence to take control of the situation. But this Adrian simply stood there, accepting that Elliot had every right to be careful. I am not asking you to forgive me today, Adrian said. I am not asking you to forget what happened. I just want the chance to know him. Elliot looked at him for a long moment. Then he quietly said, tomorrow, after the afternoon class. Adrian nodded. It was not forgiveness. It was not a second chance. But it was the first door Elliot had opened in 3 years. And Adrian knew better than anyone that some doors were not meant to be forced open. They had to be earned. The next afternoon, Adrian Whitmore arrived at the Brooklyn Art Center earlier than expected. He told himself it was because he wanted to be respectful of Elliot's time. He told himself it was because being late would send the wrong message. But deep down, Adrian knew the truth. He was nervous, a feeling he had rarely experienced in his entire life. Adrian could walk into a room full of investors and negotiate million-dollar agreements without hesitation. He could stand in front of hundreds of people and speak with complete confidence. But the thought of meeting the child he never knew existed made every carefully prepared sentence disappear. When Elliot entered the room holding Noah's hand, Adrian immediately understood something important. Elliot had built a beautiful life without him. Noah was curious, energetic, and completely unaware of the complicated history between the two adults standing nearby. Noah, this is Adrian, Elliot said gently. The little boy looked up with bright eyes. Are you my dad? The question was simple, honest, innocent. Adrian felt the weight of it instantly. He lowered himself so they were at the same level. Yes, he answered quietly. I am. Noah studied him for a moment, then smiled. You look serious. Adrian blinked, surprised. Elliot covered a small laugh. He means you always look like you are thinking about something important. Adrian looked at Noah's smile and realized something he had never considered before. This child did not see his reputation. He did not see a powerful alpha CEO. He did not see the person everyone expected him to be. Noah only saw him as a person standing in front of him. They spent the afternoon painting together. Adrian was not good at it. Not even close. His first attempt at drawing a simple animal looked more like a strange shape than anything recognizable. Noah laughed, not in a cruel way, but with pure happiness. It is okay, Noah said. You can practice. Adrian smiled before he even realized it. Practice. The word felt strange. He had always expected himself to be excellent immediately. He had built his entire life around avoiding mistakes. But sitting there with Noah, covered in small spots of paint, he discovered that some of the most meaningful moments were not perfect. They were real. Elliot watched quietly from across the room. He noticed the small changes in Adrian. The way he listened. The way he asked questions instead of giving instructions. The way he allowed himself to be uncertain. Later, after Noah finished his artwork, Elliot and Adrian sat outside the center while the afternoon sun lowered behind the buildings. He likes you, Elliot said. Adrian looked surprised. Really? Elliot nodded. Children are usually honest. Adrian looked down at his hands. I missed so much. Elliot did not answer immediately. The sadness in Adrian's voice was different from before. It was not frustration. It was regret. You cannot change the past, Elliot said softly. I know. Adrian looked toward the art center window where Noah was showing his painting to another child. But I want to be there for the future. Elliot studied him carefully. 3 years ago, Adrian had walked away because he thought love would take something from him. Now he was standing there, realizing that love had never been the thing he needed to protect himself from. It was the thing he had been missing all along. For the first time, Elliot saw something different in Adrian's eyes. Not a demand, not a claim, just a quiet hope. And maybe, after everything they had lost, hope was where something new could finally begin. Adrian Whitmore learned that rebuilding trust was not a single moment. It was not one apology, one conversation, or one perfect gesture that could erase 3 years of distance. It was built through small choices repeated every day. And for the first time in his life, Adrian was willing to be patient. He stopped trying to prove that he had changed and started showing it instead. Every week, he visited the Brooklyn Art Center. Sometimes he helped organize supplies. Sometimes he sat with Noah while Elliot finished his work. Sometimes he simply listened. He discovered that being present was very different from being impressive. In his old life, Adrian measured everything by results. Success had numbers. Achievements had awards. Decisions had clear outcomes. But with Elliot and Noah, there was no schedule that guaranteed everything would be fixed. There was only trust, slowly returning one day at a time. Elliot noticed the difference. He noticed that Adrian no longer walked into a room expecting everyone to adjust around him. He noticed that Adrian asked questions and waited for answers. He noticed that Adrian apologized without adding explanations afterward. One evening, after the art center closed, Elliot found Adrian helping Noah finish a small science project for school. Adrian, the man who once ran a company with thousands of employees, was sitting at a small table trying to understand a child's instructions for building a model. "You are doing it wrong," Noah said seriously. Adrian looked surprised. "I am." Noah nodded. "Yes, you have to have fun while doing it." Adrian laughed quietly. "I think I forgot how." Elliot heard those words from across the room. They were simple, but they revealed something Adrian had hidden for years. He had spent so much time becoming someone everyone respected that he forgot how to simply be someone people loved. Later that night, Elliot and Adrian walked together outside the center. The streets were calm, and the city lights reflected across the sidewalks. "You really changed," Elliot said. Adrian looked ahead. "I had to." Elliot was quiet for a moment. "Because of me?" Adrian shook his head. "Because I finally understood myself." That answer surprised Elliot. Before, Adrian had always spoken as if everything was a battle between what he wanted and what others wanted from him. Now, he sounded like someone who had finally stopped running. "I used to think accepting our bond meant losing control," Adrian continued. "But I was wrong. The problem was never the bond. The problem was that I was afraid of trusting someone enough to let them matter." Elliot looked at him carefully. "And now?" Adrian took a slow breath. "Now I know that caring about someone does not make me weaker." The honesty between them felt different from before. There was no pressure, no expectation, no attempt to force the future. Just two people standing in the same place, finally understanding each other. A few days later, Adrian received an invitation to an important company event. In the past, he would have attended alone, surrounded by people who admired his success but knew nothing about him. This time, he looked at the invitation and thought about something else. He wanted Elliot and Noah there, not as symbols, not as proof of anything, simply because they were the people he wanted beside him. And when Adrian finally understood that, he realized he was no longer trying to win back the past. He was building a future worth staying for. The evening of the company event arrived faster than Adrian Whitmore expected. For years, these gatherings had been nothing more than carefully planned appearances. He would arrive, shake hands, answer questions, and leave before anyone could see the person behind the title. But this time was different. This time, when Adrian stepped into the Grand Hall in Manhattan, he was not alone. Elliot walked beside him, and Noah held his hand with a small smile as he looked around at the bright lights and elegant decorations. Adrian noticed the reactions around them. The whispers, the surprised expressions. People who had known him for years were seeing a side of him they never expected. The old Adrian would have cared. He would have worried about opinions, rumors, and how others viewed his choices. But standing there with Elliot and Noah, he realized something important. The opinions that once controlled him no longer mattered. Elliot noticed his calm expression and smiled slightly. "You are not nervous?" he asked. Adrian looked at him. "I think I would have been nervous before." "Before?" Elliot asked. Adrian nodded. "Before I understood what actually matters." The words were simple, but Elliot felt the meaning behind them. This was not the same man who had stood in that ballroom years ago and chosen distance over connection. This was someone who had finally learned that love was not a weakness. During the event, Adrian introduced Elliot and Noah to people who had only ever known him as a successful businessman. He did not describe Elliot as his bond. He did not define him by destiny. He simply said, "This is Elliot. He is the person who taught me what it means to choose someone." Elliot looked at him, surprised. It was not a dramatic announcement. It was not meant to impress anyone. It was just the truth. Later that night, after the event ended, Adrian and Elliot stood outside beneath the city lights. The streets were quieter, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you accepted me that day? Elliot asked. Adrian looked at the sky for a moment before answering. Sometimes. And what do you think? Adrian smiled softly. I think I would have found you sooner. But I also think I needed to lose my way before I could understand where home was. Elliot looked down, remembering everything they had been through. The rejection, the distance, the years they spent apart. None of it disappeared, but it no longer controlled them. I cannot promise that everything will always be easy, Elliot said. Adrian nodded. I know, and I cannot forget the past. I know that too. Elliot looked at him. But I can see who you are now. For Adrian, those words meant more than any achievement he had ever earned. Because for the first time, he was not being admired for what he had built. He was being accepted for who he truly was. Months later, the art center displayed a new painting created by Elliot. It showed two paths that began separately, but eventually crossed beneath the same sky. Noah proudly explained the meaning to visitors. It means people can find each other more than once. Adrian stood nearby, listening quietly. He thought about the person he had been before. The alpha who believed control was everything. The man who rejected something beautiful because he was afraid. Then he looked at Elliot and Noah, and he understood the truth. Destiny had brought them together once. But love was what made them choose each other again. And this time, Adrian would never walk away.